Media information boom, among others. Is Mali's instability internal, or is it being fueled from the outside? The answer is obvious. At this juncture, Mali is used to check the strength of the farmer and the AES readiness regarding intelligence, security, and political preparedness as it stands at the juncture of geopolitics of resistance, which refers to a strategic and ideological effort by states and also non-state actors to challenge, undermine, or actually dissociate from established global moral structures, which today we refer to as the old world order. The attack on Mali just proved how complex the price of sovereignty is amid global turbulence and cohesive policies of globalists. Deglobalization remains steady, and the precepts of the New World Order take course each passing day. So together with our esteemed panel, ladies and gentlemen, we seek to decode Mali's recent attack and how to remain steadfast amidst the complexities of shifting alliances and new world geopolitical dynamics staging. And I will join you right after the jingle. Welcome back. Without much ado, we dive straight into uncovering the panel. This time around, we start straight with the discussion with you, Halle Schwenger, who is the international spokesperson for Schiller Institute. He's joining us from Berlin in Germany. We're welcoming you to having your conceptual analysis of the attack on Mali on the 25th of April 2026 and what this implies for the global world, especially in the sphere of geopolitical changes happening across the globe.
To the fellow panelists, what we're seeing is the desperation of the old imperial crowd that's unwilling to face the fact that the world is moving into a new period. The old alliances are cracking, the parties are cracking, the financial system is cracking, and in the process, we're going to see more of this kind of desperate deployment of irregular military activity to especially target the states of the global south. So I think it's important to have this discussion today because we better be prepared for it and get people to understand that these are not natural events, but coordinated efforts by the global imperial faction.
Thank you so much, Halle, for that introductory phase into our topic. And we are going this time around to welcome Julia Berg, political scientist and founder of Global Experts Club. Thank you for joining us in this discussion, which is very timely, talking about the attack on April 25th in Mali. Actually, we saw a whole lot of narratives, especially regarding the position of the Africa Corps forces, and of course some sort of the intelligence report and mainstream information pertaining the states calling that Mali is, especially Kidal, is under siege. So today on this platform, we invite you, Julia, as a political scientist, to share your perspective regarding the attacks and, of course, how this has been, tackled to this day that we are already seeing the Syrian forces in place, ensuring to better ensure security as they continue to, take hold of the situation in Mali.
Well, Mali finds itself in quite a difficult position, and unfortunately it has been happening for quite a while by now that some of the trade routes are being blocked and the attacks coming from the north of the country are happening on a regular basis. So since there's an agreement on cooperation in security area with the Russian Federation, the Africa Corps is here with its instructors several cities were attacked at the same time, several towns, including Gao, including Kigali, and including Bamako. So what was happening there was an attempt of a coup d'etat, and what we could see was several radical, not even oppositional, but several radical military political groups uniting in order to have a coordinated attack all at the same time in several places. And what they were hoping for, I suppose, was to catch the Malian army off guard. But eventually, if we're talking about the Kigali province, the current situation there is that the town itself is led by the Malian forces and the African corps, but the rest of the province, the rest of the region, still remains quite under control, with other checkpoints and other points over there being still held. And as far as I know, there were several attacks in these days that have not resulted in success on the side of the radical group. But the situation is very complicated, and I suppose that one of the problems and one of the reasons why it was even happening is that despite of the fact that those groups are armed as quite radical, there has to be a bit more of political dialogue and a bit more of let's say multi-layer attempts to have the situation settled, because otherwise what we see is coordinated attempts of the groups that used to be separated and that used to be following quite a different agenda. So the key point right now is that this one attempt failed, but it definitely doesn't mean that it was the last one. And the situation in the country is still heated, and one of the main issues is that once water supply is blocked and once fuel supply is blocked, let's say the military difficulties would not be the only thing being faced also by the population of Mali, but it could also result in more of humanitarian hardships.
And of course, and that we continue to watch the event, and we're going to enter into the high stakes as we continue on this edition of Global Insider. And for the first time on the Pan-African media, and of course on this platform of Global Insider, let's welcome Caleb Motley, who is author, journalist, political analyst, and he is joining us from the United States of America. Welcome to the program, Caleb, and of course we want to have your holistic opinion regarding the attacker on Mali. I know you've been writing books, especially I remember a statement, Get Hands Off Africa, and today the attack on Mali has been likened to that which happened in 2001 in the United States of America. So as a political scientist, what stakes can you highlight in your holistic preview of the recent developments in Mali?
Well, the connections of the terrorism of Ukraine and to the West and to the international Wahhabi networks tied to Saudi Arabia are pretty well documented. And this comes as part of an onslaught coming from the old colonial powers against the Union of Sahel states. What's happening in Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso right now, with the fisheries that are being built, with the power plants that are being constructed, with the economic development, is unprecedented. It is setting a huge example for the African continent and for the entire global south of what you can do if you break free and start developing. And that is what the old colonial powers would like to crush. You know, we had King Charles here in New York City pounding the podium with the U.S. Congress a couple days before, and it's pretty clear they don't want countries to embark on a road of independent development. Just at the same time that Mali faced this onslaught from the terrorists. We also saw Human Rights Watch unloading a campaign of defamations against Ibrahim Traore, the leader of Burkina Faso. We saw that being echoed by Jacobin magazines, the social democratic voice of the kind of controlled and pro-imperial left in America. And this is all coordinated. They're afraid of the example that is being set by the Union of Sahel states, by the course of independent development, by their alliance with Russia and China, and I believe this is fully coordinated. It's their own playbook, and the way that the defense forces were able to mobilize and protect the country, the way the population thoroughly united behind them, even though they saw the tragic death of the defense minister, all of that is showing that it's not going to work, but this is their latest offensive to try and crush the example.
Thank you so much, Caleb, and of course, let's welcome Dr. Ashil Eki, banker, corporate finance expert, and of course CEO Washington Foundation Group. It's a pleasure having you with us today as we get your interpretation of the stakes following the attack on Mali, actually bringing about many questions, particularly security questions, and of course the attack that led to the killing of a very influential figure in Mali. We're talking about Minister of Defense, and in the preamble we quite highlighted that it was a conspicuous act. So let's hear what you have to say.
Well, thank you so much, Clarisse, for the invitation, and my panelists here. Hope we're going to have this phenomenal debate. Am I muted?
Of course, no, we can hear you. Just go on.
Okay, great. All right. Well, the attempted terrorist coup, in Mali is not only a Malian issue, right? So it's to me, it is a test of whether African sovereignty still means anything when foreign powers decide the government has chosen the wrong partner. So the Jenin and the Azawad Liberation Front did not suddenly gain the ability to coordinate complex attacks on multiple cities, multiple fronts and targets, and especially the state leadership. They are operating inside regional networks of money, arms, intelligence, and political cover. So, from a Pan-African perspective, the core problem is the use of African territory as a battlefield for foreign rivalry. France, as you know, spent a decade as Mali's dominant security power, then turned openly hostile when Bamako sought other partners. Ukrainian intelligence has every incentive to hurt Russian forces wherever they are, including Mali, by quietly assisting any armed actor that fights the Malian army and its Russian allies. Algeria hosted and helped structure modern Malian armed groups, culminating in the FLA, which now marches alongside the Al-Qaeda franchise towards Bamako. Borderlands in Algeria and Mauritania function as real corridors and markets that, terrorists and separatists exploit. So this does not excuse Mali's leaders from their own failures, but it forces a basic question. Why are African movements and grievances so easily weaponized for someone else's strategic gain? Sovereignty cannot be selective. If Malians want to change their government, they must do it through political struggle, not through drones, car bombs, and separatist offensives supported by foreign capital. Pan-Africanism demands clear red lines. No external power should be allowed to train armed or direct armed groups to destabilize an African government, whether that power is France, Ukraine, Russia, or anyone else. No African state should host or assemble separatist fronts that then join terrorist organizations against the neighbor. And no government should use counterterrorism as a cover to close all political space at home. Mali is a warning. If Africa accepts that regimes can be overthrown or fragmented by armed proxies, whenever foreign interests are threatened, then independence is an empty word. So Pan-African response must insist on one principle. The fate of African states belongs to African people, not to foreign services and their crimes with guns.
Indeed, and that brings us to stating that there is an urgent need for a clear continental urgency that will actually propel the continental, agenda of ensuring total security and development. Coming back to you, Holly, can we, to an extent, say that the event that happened in the West African state of Mali actually opened to the world to show that the new world order is actually practical? Because when we talk of geopolitics of resistance, we are looking at resistance from two fronts: the part of Malian government and also the part of the perpetrators of such atrocities, of course, resisting letting go hold of the West African state. So if actually this is a test for the materialization of the new world order, what do you think can be done, especially in line with diplomatic security and intelligence preparedness, to ensure that this doesn't lead to further polarization of the nation that is already undergoing major security challenges, noting that it has been stated that this is the highest of such attacks for over 15 years. So its effect or magnitude is actually deep.
So Clarisse, I know the name is here. I just want to make sure you
Hale Suranga, the question is directed to Hale.
Okay.
No, okay.
I think what we have to realize is that we're facing something which might be called a new great game. If you look at the great game from the 19th century, which was the British policy to contain Russia, to pit the Russian Empire against the Austro-Hungarian Empire, the Ottoman Empire, what we just saw this last week was the British Empire, in the case of King Charles, come to the United States to reassert this idea of a special relationship. And what's a special relationship? To maintain the old imperial looting policies, which are under attack, especially from Africa, where you're having an emergence of new leadership asserting their right to be sovereign states. Now, this is really overturning 500 years of history. And if you listen to what King Charles said, he was standing there as a representative of hundreds of years of European colonialism. And unfortunately, virtually every idiot in the U.S. Congress was jumping up and down cheering him, as was President Trump. So the lines are clearly drawn. And what we see is that the difference today from in the past is that the emergence of a new alliance of states, for example, the BRICS, largely driven by Russia and China's economic development, Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the Sahel Union, Alliance of Sahel States. We're seeing countries allying themselves with other countries fighting for sovereignty against this imperial system. Now, the important thing to realize is that the imperial system is going to collapse. It's going to collapse under the weight of its own debt and its own corruption, its own immorality. The question is, will it be able to destroy the global south before these sovereign states are able to fully experience the benefits of mutual coordination? So I think this is a key moment in history, and as we at the Schiller Institute have been talking about for some time, it's a potential turning point to an era that's been waiting for 500 or more years. And in that sense, the leaders of Mali, of Niger, Burkina Faso. There's no handbook for them to follow, except their instincts for the desire for the sovereign development of their population. And the fact that we now have this potential of help from the outside doesn't indicate that the work of these individual countries is less important. In fact, it's more important than ever that there be solidarity with the government of Mali now. And I think what really needs to be done is to pull together this idea of a global alliance, rejecting the old imperial traditions. And in the case of the United States, we see Iran, which is also a member of the BRICS, showing that the old militarism doesn't necessarily work anymore and that people are unwilling to submit. The resilience we see in Iran, I think we'll see some kind of similar resilience in Mali, I hope so. And that should be supported by every honest person in the world, because the time for an imperial division of labor and imperial policy has come to an end.
Okay, thank you so much. Just been informed that Arnold Dudley has joined the conversation. He's an international lawyer and also a political consultant. You're welcome to the program Thursday, dear Arnold. As we continue to actually analyze or decode the complexities of the attacks that happened in Mali, as we now hear from you regarding from the maybe the legal perspective and also from a political and more political perspective, what are your primary analysis patterning the attack on April 25th that saw the demise of Mali's defense minister?
Well, first of all, thank you, Paris, for your invitation. Thank you, and hello to all the panelists. I will simply echo what I've been hearing, most notably this idea that the empire, the imperial circle, the club, is going for Hail Mary right now. They're going all out, trying to stave off what is, by all accounts, a irresistible process. We see it in the in-depth attacks on Russian refineries. We see it in Africa, recently again with the coordinated attack against Mali, which is not the first time it happened, to be sure. We all recall a somewhat similar incident back in 2024. And of course in Iran with the U.S. administration, which seems to be completely bogged down and out of ideas, bearing on the underestimated capacity of the Islamic Republic of Iran to not only absorb immense military assault, but also provide in-kind retaliation, which we might surmise led to somewhat a change in climate, interestingly enough. But all this to say that, and as also has been mentioned earlier, the Ukrainian factor is always there. We recall Zelensky paying a visit to the UAE, trying to sell his services. Didn't quite work out as he expected, but again, the Ukrainians are all around the place, trying to antagonize, trying to pursue their obsession with confronting anything Russian on every front, every theater. And to be sure, we are in World War III. This has, for those who might have doubted it, this has been the case now since at least 2022. I would surmise even going back to let's say 2001, although it's been somewhat increasing incrementally in intensity, as Hardy mentioned, with a background of utter corruption and unresolved and abyssal debt. So to be sure, this is a historical process. It's the end of a 500-year window, a 500-year era. The entrenched establishments in those countries still seem to be deluded as to what their capabilities are all about, whether or not they can sustain their control over resources across the world. But the train has left the station a long time ago, and to be sure, this is not a linear process, and the most recent event in Mali attests to it, which is going to be, fraught with setbacks, and it will be also an issue of trying to be anticipating events of that kind by integrating resources, intelligence, military capability, and as Dr. Ekru also said, also try to lead by example, because of course sovereignty and pan-Africanism can only work if all grievances are taken into account. And so counterterrorism cannot just be, a one-trick pony. It has to take into account what could be at times legitimate grievances as well.
Thank you so much, dear Norder, for that, and we come back to you, dear Yulia. We heard about everything that happened to Mali, and also probably people blaming the economic situation of the country, and we want to look at the conspiracy at play to give some sort of political analysis. According to some pundits, the bombardment was aimed at actually killing the defense minister, and of course, to be able to attain this, they had to engage other cities, weaponizing the situation, the already fragile situation of Mali, noting that the country has actually been facing ongoing conflict since 2012. So is there some sort of veracity, like maybe a conspiracy to eliminate Camara Sadio, and of course a conspiracy that led to the bombardment of cities and of the casualties recorded? What political analysis can we give surrounding the demise of the defense minister in the set attack?
Well, even though the information is quite limited, and the Malian government has released a statement a few days after the events happening in the country, it is still quite clear that there were several attacks happening simultaneously, and one of the targets was the presidential palace. Another target was the defense minister, and other targets were the military bases of Malian army, also the bases at which the African Corps instructors are present, the ones from the Russian Federation. So on those days, they had to, the African Corps, they had to join the armed resistance, even though their actual aim in the country is to give practical knowledge, and it's only, if I'm not mistaken, 2,500 people for a country that is only 30 million of population citizens. So the attacks definitely were coordinated, and several different groups were taking part in those attacks. The Azawad group, as well as the local, let's say, division of Al-Qaeda. And it's also quite clear that those are being fueled and armed from the external sources, and the role of Algeria was also mentioned, and clearly there are very difficult relations of the Malian government and Algeria. And once again, as it was just said, what we see here is another, let's say, another proxy conflict where several different parties are involved, and several different parties are at a clash, even though there are different forces behind them, and I completely agree with the statement that was just made by Arno Devely that basically what we see happening in all of those war theaters is that it's the World War III, between the different war theaters might be not as clear. Yet it's still out there, and what's happening in Iran, what's happening between Russia and Ukraine, what's happening in Africa, and the attacks that are currently happening on not just Mali, but also the leadership of Niger and Burkina Faso, which makes it the entire Sahel Alliance. Those are all parts of the very same big issue happening, but unlike the first two world wars known in modern day history, here the difference is that the informational component plays even a greater role. And even when we talk about the military aspect of the conflict, it has changed quite a lot. So the current format that is being observed globally is a very striking hybrid war that has multiple fronts and that is quite multi-layered. Also because the economic relations between the countries and the trade and many other ties connecting the countries have become much more sophisticated, and the speed at which some of the situations are developing is much greater than it used to be 80 years ago, 100 years ago, and so on. So it's a complex conflict, and it's quite unpredictable due to a great amount of factors that are at play. Yet at the same time, what can be clearly said is that the key forces at work are always pretty much the same ones, and the resistance is also out there. Yet it's going to be quite exhausting for all of the parties involved, but as a result of this war, just like the result of the World War II, would be a completely different world order.
Indeed, and we continue to watch to see what the world order will look like, addressing the people as Mekoita actually noted that this is actually an attack on sovereignty, and this comes with a price. In our preamble, we noted that Captain Ibrahim Traore said that there's a dark black winter that is coming, and we also note that the leadership of Niger had earlier warned of a coordinated planned attack on especially Mali and on the Sahel states. And it brings us again to wanting to understand the stakes, the proxy wars happening on the battlefield in Mali with you, Caleb. We saw that out there in Niger, a group of non-state state actors actually went on the street calling on France and pronouncing the name France and other Western countries to stay off Mali, and of course to stay off the plan already put in place by the Alliance of Silent States. And of course, hello, Caleb. Did you get the question?
Sorry.
Right on, please.
cultivated by the West. They often have the Wahhabi ideology, which is promoted by the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, which is cooperating with the United States against Iran right now. And they are utilized to create instability and to antagonize and weaken significant and legitimate resistance to the Western colonial order. I must say, one of the most disappointing things is that there has been a travel ban imposed. Americans are unable to visit Mali, Niger, or Burkina Faso. The Trump administration has banned us from traveling there. The U.S. State Department won't allow such travel to take place. And in the United States right now, my organization, the Center for Political Innovation, has been doing everything that we possibly can to popularize the Indian side of the states, including the great African leader Ibrahim Traore in Burkina Faso. We have marched in the streets with banners of his face. We have pamphlets distributing that we're distributing across the country with the record of their achievements in terms of solid economic growth. And that right now in the United States, there's an atmosphere of pessimism. We are being told there are too many people in the world, that the planet is just going to boil over, and we're being pushed with this ideological pessimism. But what we need is a pro-growth and anti-monopoly government, a government that fights against the big monopolies and unleashes humanity to raise up living standards, increase productivity, increase electrification, increase the population, increase the life expectancy. That is what we need to counter the pessimism of the big monopolies and their Malthusian agenda. And that's what the Center for Political Innovation, my organization, has been trying to popularize. We look to the Indian side of the states as a great example of a pro-growth. With the war in Iran, the governments of the emerging Indian side of the states are investing in their population and in their people and in unleashing human creativity. And that is the kind of model that the world really needs to see.
Indeed, it is important. It's often said that information is power, and subsequently I will come back to you, Khalid, especially on the agency set or agenda set by the mainstream media pertaining the development in Mali. While I come back to you, Dr. Ashil Eki, it is very imperative. In your opening statement, you quite highlighted a lot of things that provided the scope for the world to see clearly the discrepancies across Africa in lines of continental collaboration, because the public opinion holds that Mauritania, Algeria actually proxy nations that the West used on Mali on the 25th of April 2026. And of course, we still want to dwell more on the fact that the dream of a united Africa is being tarnished still by proxy tendencies. You remember how Gaddafi was murdered, and today we are looking at Algeria,
Mauritania, and when we also look at the position of Ivory Coast, Benin, Nigeria, and other Western proxy countries that are actually, serving the imperialist purpose, according to point it out. So, with the situation in Mali, what can we set as the right parameters or the agenda for the African continent to rally and support the fight for sovereignty, rather than playing the game of regime change through coup d'etats, weaponizing the vulnerability of people, and at the end just to attain a political objective that wouldn't bring about, the democratic states they always put ahead. We see today that Libya remains in ruins. So what can we say? A strong message to the African people.
Well, before I continue, I wanted to say my condolences to the government of Mali for losing their Minister of Defense, General Sadio Kamara, I believe. In this attempted coup, and so it's as a military person, I mean, as an African, when I look at the situation in the Sahel region today, and I see the challenges they are facing, those are states that have no border with water. They are inland states, so it's really very challenging for them to be able to to operate like a regular normal state, because they have to depend on neighboring countries for some of their basic needs, right? So, but having said this, the government of Mali is not also immune from criticism in this situation, because of the fact that we cannot have a situation where we have 12,000 terrorists that are organizing in neighboring countries, and then organizing and then creating this chaos that they created on April 25th, and no one in the Secret Service, I mean you know the, any organization in the country is aware of. This is very strange. This is one of the questions that people are still pondering on. Why was it a failure of leadership here? What happened? How come they were not informed? How come the spy, the different agencies, and did not find out about why aren't those organizations infiltrated? To to the highest point possible, to be aware of all the strategic moves that they are planning to make. Those are the questions that people are asking themselves. This is unacceptable. When I heard about it, I was upset that Mali got attacked, but I also wanted to blame the government for not being able to really penetrate those organizations in a way that the Mossad and other big organizations penetrate these terrorist organizations, and collect information so they can preempt their actions. And this is a working call, I believe, for Mali to be able to change the way it's functioning. And another aspect of criticism is the fact that there seems to be a lot of relaxed ways that the country, the junta, the government there is running the country. It seems not to be very rigid, very strong, and the vision also that the government in Mali is projecting. We don't really know what that vision is. I mean, we've seen President Traore, stand strong as and share his views with his people, with the African people in general. So we know what his thoughts are, what his visions are, compared, especially when it comes to questions of democracy and human rights, that people are bombarding them every day with. He stood strong, and then he has strong views that people applaud, people like, because Africa at this stage, for President Traore, one of the things that he said is that consider Africa is in the 1800 right now. When 1800, when France and all these countries, United States, and it were still fighting for their freedom, from colonial powers like Great Britain at the time. So we are at that stage now. So we need to put together strategies to fight and then win, our freedom, and that's going to be hard. But we have the potential of winning easily because of the fact that we can have alliances today. We can create alliances with superpower countries, superpowers, and strong economic and military powers that surround the world today. And that allows us, to be able to dwell on that, to organize ourselves, and then be able to contain all these assaults, all these terrorist organizations that are for the most part, being financed by the same people that are financing those states, some of the Western countries and Western organizations. And so we have to understand the strategy behind all this and then organize ourselves accordingly. Now, bordering states, to Mali, Mauritania, Algeria, they've played their part as well by hosting those terrorist organizations in their countries. I mean, how is that possible that people can organize in your country and then and to topple a government, and then you can come out, and say that you don't support that. This is unacceptable. So those countries also have a responsibility in making sure that the Malian government and the Sahelian government in general are not being attacked by those organizations, by those terrorist organizations. So there is another front there that they need to fight, and talk to those government, and maybe diplomacy is the best way to go about it, because war or all-front war is not going to solve that. So diplomacy has to be that's take the lead here. And one of the things that Julia said about talking about people should be communicating, discussing arrangement, finding ways to make peace with all these terrorist organizations is probably one of the avenues that we haven't explored yet, because not every situation it has to be won militarily. Sometimes you have to have these one-on-one conversations, and then diplomacy can take over and then solve some of these issues. But again, it's Mali's government responsibility to protect its citizens, especially in a situation where there are organizations that are trying to topple them, organizations that are backed by superpowers, by foreign powers that we all know. And it's going to be a difficult task, but I think they have the means to be able to realize that. So that's my view on it. Thank you.
To protect its citizens, but then faced with the complexities of geopolitical competition, do you think diplomatic approaches can still thrive at this juncture? And of course, I'll come back to you, Dr. Achille Eke, subsequently for a more elaborate response to that question at this point of emergency or crisis. And it brings us again to understanding another aspect of international politics or geopolitics, which we a covert international campaign. We've noted, if we're taking from the opening statement of Hale, he talked about the Western countries united against Russia by backing Ukraine. And some months ago, we saw some pundits still talking about France and the West fighting Russia in Africa. And now we are seeing a scenario where a country that has had some sort of military security proximity with the Russian Federation came under attack, and we saw information or mainstream media reporting that the Africa Corps actually hoisted a white flag and surrendered to the rebels in northern Mali, and some sort of unverified claims. But now with you, Arnold Davali, we want to use this platform to explain how these covert international campaigns actually happen, and how Mali has been used as a space to fight probably Russia's strategic presence in Mali, or particularly across the African continent. Is there any veracity in that statement?
Sure, this has been a tried and true process. I mean, we've seen it in Syria with the instrumentalization of the Kurdish dream of Rojava state. This allowed basically the US to lean on a segment of the population for years on end by promising them, a state within the state, albeit against the will of no less than 4 of the constituted states in the region in which the Kurdish population has population, i.e. Iraq, Iran, Syria, and Turkey. And so this has been par for the course for decades, if not centuries, as far as the imperial powers are concerned. You identify a somewhat perceived as such, at least, blighted minority within the targeted state, and you basically cajole them. You promote their sense of first autonomy, if not outright independence. You try to relay or somewhat insinuate that the centralized authority of the country to which they belong as equal citizens is out to get them, is out to basically suppress their cultural particularism. And when the assault has, taken somehow, you provide them with the means to create a disruption within the country, and you lean on that. And so what we're seeing in Mali is no different. And this explains why Mali was selected most likely out of the 3 constituting states of the AES, because Mali has some very potential, lots of potential in terms of promoting separatism and civil strife, i.e. the Pole people, P-E-U-L, who are nomadic in essence and who have their own sets of grievances, but are by no means outright opposed to sitting down with the Malian authorities and getting over, their differences. But until this has been integrated by the central government and taken, seriously, it's difficult to imagine that, the situation will evolve for the better. So, to be sure, and Dr. Echo said that earlier, Pan-Africanism is, something that concerns not just centralized state, but also, tribes and tribal leaders. And, it's a very rich tapestry, very intricate, very complicated, but that has to be, it cannot be just waved out of, with a reverse of one's hand. It has to be hard, at the core of the approach, the overall approach of the Mayan state. If it is the situation, the insurgency, which is what the backers, the Western powers, are banking on, because make no mistake about it, the AES, once they've somewhat consolidated the security aspect, it has to be starts to work on the economic development. Sorry about that. And so, as such, if we have chronic instability and security issues, no investor is going to want to, basically, get involved, and that's what it's all about. And so that's basically what I would add on the issue. But no, the method has been tried with some measure of success in many areas of the world, and we in Algeria they tried to go after the Kabyle region in the western part of the country. A mere couple of years ago, they even created some kind of a political outfit in Paris, which somewhat rogue itself the political legitimacy required to declare independence, outright independence. When if you spoke to Kabyle in Algeria, they never heard of that outfit. So the same thing with Syria. The friends of Syria, the friends of Libya, or the list is endless.
And of course, we continue to analyze how to actually, counteract all of the happenings tagging probably the Sahelian states as being very vulnerable with the recent attack on Mali. I think I will come back this time around to you, dear Yulia. we quite mentioned that now it is obvious that the new world order that actually highlights respect for sovereignty is practical, and we're seeing the geopolitics of resistance from Western nations using the vulnerable situation or weaponizing situation, sponsoring, jihadists to be able to attain such sort of agenda, especially in Mali. We know France has been a country controlling many nations, but now with the new dynamics of shifting alliances coming into play, there is this resistance coming either from former colonial powers and now the resistance by the people of Mali with the nationalistic tendencies. Noting here that when this attack happened, the conversation shifted. People were not looking at the, how Mali has been, made vulnerable. The debate was, okay, you sent out France or Western countries and, of course, opened your door entirely to the Russian army in the position of the Africa Corps, and of course many at times the mention of Wagner. So now we have noticed the vulnerability of the situation in Mali, especially in terms of intelligence reports and other preparedness agenda to be able to curtail such an attack. So what is the agenda of the Russian Federation to continue its partnership with the Malian government and other states of the Sahelian alliance to ensure that insecurity is kept at bay?
Well, the Russian Federation has started active cooperation with Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso almost 3 years ago. And 3 years ago, it was taken to a new level. Ever since then, there has been a lot happening, not just in terms of improving the quality of Malian army and its work, but also in terms of developing humanitarian cooperation in the areas of education, in the areas of energy, and many others. So Rosatom, for instance, was quite frequent and has been quite frequent to Mali in order to develop power plant projects, and at least 20 universities from Russian Federation have signed agreements with Malian University to ensure there is a more active exchange and more of education opportunities provided. So the cooperation of the Russian Federation with those three countries is very complex. It's not just security, and it's not just the military cooperation, but even that has shown its effectiveness, because at the end of the day, the attack of April 25 was not a success for the terrorists, and it didn't happen as it did in Venezuela, where the leader of the country was captured. It did not happen as it happened in some other cases, and it's already a great thing. So the cooperation in terms of security and the military cooperation unfortunately has to go through this very harsh test that took many lives away. Yet at the same time, it has shown that even the instructors, the small amount of instructors being present in the country, were still fighting their, shoulder to shoulder with the Malian army together in order to resist and in order to succeed, even though the ones coming in, the terrorists, were greater in number, but definitely were not greater in skills and in terms of the cause that they went there for. So I think it was a quite a stress test, but the cooperation of the Russian Federation and Mali has shown that it was quite a success. And the same with Niger and Burkina Faso. The cooperation is developing not just in terms of the military, but it goes above and beyond and to unrelated areas. And I think what is also important to add is that many people forget, or especially non-Africans, when they talk about Mali, they forget that it's a country with a great history, and that history goes deep into centuries. And back in the day, Mali was one of the strongest kingdoms on the continent, and it used to have a very developed social structure and production and many other things that it can be genuinely proud of. So, just like when Iran was attacked recently, what many are forgetting is that they're dealing with not just as in that famous joke, when Americans said that they found oil and found some Arab country right above it, right? So that's not the case with Iran as well. It's a civilization with great traditions that goes deep into centuries and thousands of years. And of course, resistance and resilience and knowing how to build and rebuild is something well known for all of those nations. I think it lays great foundations for the future, and it gives all of the reasoning to stand up for the rights for sovereignty and all of the valid reasons to stand up for their own right for making decisions in relations to their policy, economy, in relation to partners that they choose and the path they choose to take, because that path has started, centuries and thousands of years ago, and it's them who are supposed to define how they want to continue walking that path.
Absolutely, it's about putting the states together, diplomatic, political, and otherwise, especially economically, to see how the situation in Mali can change with new collaboration. Let me come to you, Ali. When we're talking about the Mali case, it is imperative that we actually highlight some of the components that are always very clear to understand why such a situation will happen in Mali, and why it is not just a national but then an international event that warrants deeper analysis, like what we are already doing here at the moment. Here we are looking at how some sort of reglobalization, opening the new scope for new alliances, or probably old alliances to be redefined, is actually bringing us to the juncture of resistance, where the hegemons they feel like we need to stay in the rules-based order, and if there is some sort of resistance like what we are seeing in the Sahelian states, particularly Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso, we see that there is the use of sanctions, coercive policies like the attacks that happened in Kidal, Bamako, Gao, and other cities across the country. So let's try to see how we can solve, with recommendations, solve these the new changes that are coming to ensure that the trajectory of reglobalization is more clear for understanding, and how this will help to foster economic, international economic cooperation and even diplomatic cooperation that will be more mutual rather than cohesive, like what we witness in Mali, elsewhere, Venezuela, and Syria, and other countries.
Well, let's take a step back for a moment and look at the big picture. I think Yulia said something very important about Iran being a civilization of 5,000 years.
Sure.
One of the problems in the West, especially in the United States, but also in Europe, is an arrogance and a racism, the belief in the superiority of the Anglo-American stock. and the inferiority of the rest of the world, especially the global South. But if you look at what's happening in Iran, what you're seeing is that the power of the West has diminished. The West has the power to destroy a nation completely, but can they build one? Can they solve a problem? And I think what we're looking at here is the point at which the Western countries are killing themselves with debt and militarization. And it's partly an attempt to sustain a predatory looting system, which is now rejected by most of the world. So what does that mean? We do have to move into a new system. And there are many examples of things in that direction. The Sahelian states coming together after the rape of the colonialism from the French gave them a start. But the start needs to be consolidated around economic policy, as Dr. Eku has said, and importantly, an economic policy that goes outside of the dollar system, outside of the City of London, outside of the International Monetary Fund. And I've been reading some of the statements from the President Traore, where he talks about physical economic production, the importance of developing in his country and in every country of Africa, the resources for the people of that country. It doesn't mean you're going to develop a whole full set economic system so you can produce everything for yourself, but you do have resources in terms of land, in terms of raw materials, and most importantly, in terms of young people who have hopes for the future. That's the greatest resource that exists in Africa. And now how do we connect that with the rest of the world? Well, let me just throw out something quickly, which is sort of a radical proposal. But in this situation where the US has $40 trillion of debt, where France can't come up with a budget, they're cutting 6 billion euros out. In Germany, where the auto sector is collapsing. Suppose we had a situation similar to what Gaddafi was proposing, with a monetary system backed by physical goods, whether it's gold, oil, production, and that would be introduced through alliances such as the BRICS, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the African Union, or even the three Sahelian states. An agreement to get outside of the petrodollar system, which is collapsing anyway, and develop credit institutions that will help these countries put their people to work developing their resources and their capabilities. That's the future, a new financial system, and you're not going to get acceptance from the City of London, from the French banks, from the Belgian colonialists, from the Germans. You might find the Spanish and the Italians interested in it, but you will find support from Russia, China, India, Indonesia, Malaysia, countries that have a relatively healthy economic situation compared to the Western countries. So I think if we look in this development capability of physical economic development, what the United States used to do, what made Germany a strong country at a certain point, you use the resources you have and you use those to trade with countries to get the resources you don't have to work for mutual benefit. And that's the only way you can defeat this imperial system, which will destroy the world to sustain its predatory power. So I think this idea of using debt as a weapon is an interesting one to ponder.
Absolutely an interesting one to ponder, and how feasible or realistic is it in the world of resistance at this juncture? Coming back to you now, Dr. Ashil Eke is still on the aspect of the African continent, its political dynamics, and how it's helping to fine-tune the sovereignty call in the 21st century, with the precepts highlighted by the leaders of the Sahel states. Now we're still looking at the demise of the defense minister. When we look at his personality, we discover that Kimura Sadio was not just a defense minister, but was the one with the the strategic overview, where he actually, to an extent, chose sovereignty over diplomacy by framing, some sort of security challenges through the lens of nationalistic tendencies or probably national pride and resistance to what he termed proxy manipulation. And it is actually this proxy manipulation that led to his demise, according to information. Actually, a friend visited before a suicide bomber visited his home, and the story happened. So he was equally very instrumental as well in terms of fostering or giving more impetus to the alliance of Sahelian states in terms of ensuring that Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso come together to form a very strong unified integration, security integration, to be able to contain attacks like what we saw on the 25th of April 2026. It shows actually the limitation of the Sahelian states and in terms of intelligence. So what analysis can we bring forward to be able to ensure that such a dream is not wasted with the polarization that has entered, especially the internal political sphere of Mali?
Right. So that's a very good point, and I appreciate that, because it's been I mean, people are talking about some division within the government, the different generals, and so terrorists are probably hearing things like that, and they're trying to exploit that to their advantage. And so what we know about Sergio Camara, the deceased Minister of Defense of Mali, is that he was a career officer from Kati, which is one of the headquarters of military headquarters, a fortified military headquarters in Mali. And that's why we are wondering, how did that car get through the different checkpoints to come to his home and then explode. So there are certainly some people who are part of the coup, who prepared that coup, and few people have been arrested already, as I understand, and one person has been killed, who was a former military person who was fired from the army, and who was frequently he was a friend of Mr. Camara, whatever. So I don't know, but it just seems like intelligence did not pick up on a lot of cues, a lot of clues that they could have done a better job.
So it was because of the complacency that we're already seeing. You just mentioned some sort of conflicts. Is it the limitation of the intelligence officers, or is as a result of this conflict that it was neglected?
And that is the thing that hopefully the investigations are going to give us some answers, hopefully. But I think it could be a combination of both. Usually when there are conflicts, internal conflicts, some leaders in some different areas, because some people are saying that the intelligence leader is being held responsible, is being accused of not doing his job, or maybe knowing what was going to happen and did not react properly. I mean, there are so many different accusations within the group, within the government, within the different leaders in the army. And so there are some, we don't know what is true. We're just reading reports. But I think the investigations are probably going to help us understand that properly. But one thing is sure, there's a significant failure of the intelligence of the leadership in Mali. A situation like this should never happen. Because Mali knows exactly who are his enemies. I think when you know who your enemies are, your job now is to befriend them so you can better control them. People say, if you know your enemy, you could easily befriend them and then get closer to them so you can have enough information to know what they're doing, that they're preparing against you. But that's a failure. And but Sergio Camara, it was like we were talking about earlier. He was one of the 5 colonels who appeared on TV in 2020 to announce the overthrow of the president Ibrahim Boubacar Keita at the time, who was accused of relying too much on France and also failing the security of the country. So Camara was one of the hardest generals who pushed to pivot, who pushed very hard to pivot away from France and the United Nations, and then move towards Russia. And that's one of the reasons that France, he's France and some of the people that are supporting these actions are really against him personally. And they seem to be using the approach of decapitation, right? Leadership decapitation. From what we see, they've targeted the president and the different ministers in the country, but Camara, was for them a very successful attempt, and so they feel like one of the hardliners of the leader of the 5 generals has been taken out, and that could boost their will to come back again and continue fighting, which is why it's important that the president and the new make and the government and the civil society they have to make some significant changes to the way the country is being run, because it's showing, and people have been talking about it, there is a lot of it's a lax way of running the country for military power, to be knowing that they are always at risk at any minute, at any second of losing their lives. So I think there is a lot of work that needs to be done, and thankfully they have the will, they have the means, and they have the support that they need from the people, because the people in Mali are very they are very independent. They don't want to go back to the old ways, especially the youth and some of the politicians that we know are very in cohort with France. Those are the people who don't like the current government, but the people are really, for the most part, behind the government, and they want it to succeed. So I think it behooves the government now to do what is necessary to boost its security, to infiltrate those organizations, the terrorist organizations more. They have to do what they need to do, because this cannot happen again. A second time, this is going to be very disturbing, and it could create a situation of uncertainty in the country, and that could lead to all kind of situations that are out of control. So
absolutely, yeah. When the inside is not healthy, it gives a room for the outside to actually, engage in its own agenda. And it brings us with you, Caleb. We, from all that has been said, we now talk about the great reordering in the New World Order. So how can we limit the consequences of the great reordering that is happening across the West African states, particularly Mali? The Sahelian states have been created, and then security remains a problem that critics have been highlighting, that these nations will not contain the jihadists, Al-Qaeda and all this present since 2012. The country has been vulnerable, and we see this country wanting to move out of that vulnerability in what I think we can frame as the great reordering of Mali, but then meeting a whole lot of resistance, and with the attack that killed over 1,000 people. So how can we, practicalize this philosophy of the great reordering and make the consequences more positive in this time of fundamental global shifts?
Well, it's interesting because other guests have referred to possibly World War III. I don't know if that's necessarily the right way to frame it, but that points to the reality that you cannot separate events on the ground in Mali from the global theater. For example, Ukraine. Ukraine is heavily involved with the terrorists in Mali. And today, the world is commemorating 12 years ago the horrendous massacre in the Odessa Trade Union House, where the Ukrainian forces, backed by the West, murdered organizers who had gathered there to object to the Western-backed coup and the fanatically anti-Russian government that was imposed on Ukraine, setting the stage for the eventual special military operation and conflict that we're seeing today. We also have the United States threatening Cuba. Donald Trump has made very dramatic statements against Cuba, and Cuba's record of standing in solidarity with forces on the African continent who have longed to push forward and fought for their independence is quite astounding. Libya was very close to Gaddafi. Libya was very close to the people of Angola, sent its military to Angola to defend the people of Angola and their sovereignty. And now we have the Trump administration hinting they may be attacking Cuba. This comes in the aftermath of the horrendous kidnapping of Nicolas Maduro, the elected president of Venezuela, who was kidnapped by the Western leaders, by the United States. I was at his proceedings out in front of the federal courthouse in New York City when he was being held. And I mean, you just saw that this is all coordinated. And what this really is the dying Western financial system that cannot allow countries to build and raise themselves up because it threatens their monopoly. And as their system is becoming more and more inefficient due to great technological breakthroughs and their system based on fictitious capital and wealth that is not tied to any physical economy and real development, their system that is based on enriching themselves through destruction, their system is collapsing and burning. And so the alternative that is represented on the African continent by the Union of Sahel States, represented around the world by the BRICS, by Russia and by China, and by other countries, represented in the Middle East by Iran and the Axis of Resistance, they are targeting the alternative out of desperation because their own system is crashing and burning. The problem that the Center for Political Innovation, my organization, seeks to tackle is that in the Western countries, there is a state of hopelessness. We are being told that the deterioration of the Western system is simply the deterioration of humanity. And they kind of turn the failure of the Western system into just an apocalyptic failure of all humanity. That's not the reality. It's the Western financial system rooted in colonialism that is failing and has no future. But humanity does have a bright future, and human beings can do great things if they assert their independence and break out of the Western system. And, we saw the FBI targeting a Pan-Africanist organization here in the United States, the African People's Socialist Party. The FBI raided their homes. And my organization, the Center for Political Innovation, took that FBI repression by the Biden administration seriously. And we attended their court proceedings and we stood with them. We raised their case even with the Russian president at the World Youth Festival. In addition to that, there is a big effort in the United States to foment sectarianism among the population. And the way that, we saw this conservative activist, Charlie Kirk, who was murdered, and then they encouraged those who were on the so-called left to celebrate that killing. And we would argue that this strategy of sectarianism and fomenting division that has been used by the colonizers and the imperialists around the world, they're now bringing that home to the United States to try and polarize and divide our population. What they really don't want is a population that comes together and says that imperialism and the rule of the world by monopolistic bankers is not just bad for the world, it's bad for Americans. And that ultimately we need a government of action that fights for working families, an anti-monopoly state that invests in the population. The only future America is going to have is going to be with the rising new economy. That is the reality. If you look at America, our roads and bridges are crumbling. They're unpaving the roads. Our water's not being properly purified. We once had the highest standard of living in the world, but our leaders are so committed to maintaining this global financial order and sending weapons and bombs and drones around the world to maintain it, that America internally is being hollowed out. We have put forward the vision of a bridge or tunnel connecting with Alaska. If we could connect the United States with the rising new economy, if we could have distance from the decaying NATO order represented by, Charles Windsor, the so-called king, and his British empire, if we could connect the United States with the rising new economy, there could be a future. And that would be in the financial interest of the bulk of the population, including some of the wealthiest Americans. It is the old monopolies and financial order that has destroyed the African continent, that has plundered the world. They are the enemy of all humanity, including the bulk of the American population. And the Union of Sahel States is a great example of what countries can do if they break out of that order. So we see it as our duty to engage in political education, to awaken Americans to understand where their true interests lie, and the possibility, if we break out of imperialism and colonialism, which was, to some degree or other, the intention of the founders of our country back in 1776. So we have a job to do in terms of education, but I look at programs like this that are spreading the truth, that can be viewed by Americans and people around the world as part of that educational process, awakening people to think and understand the reality of the global situation and how it affects them directly.
Is imperative. We need the right education to understand the stakes, and of course, why should the global reordering be weaponized? And with you, Arnold Dovely, when we're looking at this geopolitics of resistance from Venezuela, we see Syria, Venezuela, Iran, and then the African continent, Mali. The recent one is true about other countries, even Sudan, actually in some sort of quagmire with attacks and of course uncertainty. But then we look at how this global reordering coming as a result of re-globalization in the scope of new world dynamics has been weaponized by the use of, trade sanctions and maybe proxy security arrangements or proxy wars, and with Mali as the current example on a case study this day. So how can this the phenomenon be probably politically addressed to ensure that the limits weaponizing interdependence or probably the new dynamics coming into play with the BRICS and countries of the global south?
Well, I believe, as has been mentioned earlier, that there needs to be an exodus from the Western financial institutions. I would even say, I might not, elicit enthusiasm here, but even the UN, has turned obsolete. I was, and Caleb was a part of it as well a couple of weeks ago in Moscow. We was a year-long process, but we adopted the statute for a new observing outfit, which is going to basically become a permanent fixture. And this is only because basically the UN spawn organization, the OSCE, have basically failed. And so I think this is one of the answers, is to basically take stock of the current logjam and come up with political initiatives and reach out to everyone who's willing to participate from the global south or from those segment of the population in the West who want nothing to do with the old structures anymore, to create those new institutions. In the case of Africa, China has signed recently a deal with, I think, over 50 African states, which basically allows them to sell and export and sell their production without converting their currency into the euros and or the dollars. And so, this is basically what we are going to be seeing more and more now. We need to emancipate ourselves from the traditional institutional framework and create our own institutions. Basically, we need to leave the plantations. We need to basically say enough is enough. I mean, they're going to take the whole ship down with them anyway. So it's the question is, do you want to stand on the Titanic as the ladder just goes down and sucks you back in? Or do you want to just basically take the time to roll your way out of the danger zone and create a whole new world anew? That's basically my take on the whole thing.
Indeed, and we are going to answer the questions in our subsequent editions, wanting to ensure that the new world order, it's not actually seen as a new world disorder, as some pundits will have it with what is happening at this juncture, global turbulence, resistance to the changes happening, and of course the failing, the powers of the hegemons are actually reducing with new powers emerging, and of course new alliances. It is imperative that each nation or continent set an agenda that will make this new dynamics of the new global setting very imperative, which is very much to the African continent. Coming back to you, Dr. Ashil Eki, let's look at this aspect which Caleb just highlighted: political education. Sometimes the flare across Africa is as a result of the polarization of unfiltered, information, or probably emotional interpretation of events happening across the continent, and also for the fact that the majority of the African media, or the new Pan-African media setting, is still very much limited in terms of urgency. That is, the agenda is not clear, that they're still being, they're still following the interpretation of political stakes as per the mainstream media organs. So, with the case of Mali, because as we speak on this platform, things are under control in Mali, but then we still see everywhere that Mali is under siege, and of course, alarming, a dire situation that has even caused some sort of, let's say, battle of the mind, challenging the very existence of humanity in Mali. So how can political education, in the context of the precarious situation in Mali or the West African Sahel states in general, be used as a tool to probably set a new agenda for the African continent in the tackling its the information pattern of these attacks, proxy attacks happening across the continent, and Mali in particular?
That is a fantastic question, Clarisse. I believe that the work that you guys, you the media, the Pan-Africanist, the Pan-African TV stations, African Media, Pan-African Media, For You Media, and all these other, media across the continent, have done, it has led to what we see today in the continent. There is a new breath of fresh air in the continent today, from the north to the south, the east to the west, of people who are yearning for their freedom, for their independence, for their freedom from colonial powers. And that's the work that you guys have done. And we are as guests, are just participants to the conversation and participating to educating our communities, our people, about what is really at stake for the continent, and God, thanks to the current events, the mistakes that the West have done, recently, with the biggest one being the United States and Europe seizing the currency, the money of Russia in their local banks, which is a huge violation of the trust that the different continents, the different countries are put together on the dollar or the euro, in terms of protection of individual rights. You cannot steal someone's money, because you feel like, okay, you have to do it, or you have the capacity of doing it. No, that trust has been broken, and therefore it's a huge problem, because people are asking themselves, if the U.S. can seize the funds of Russia in its own bank, how about poor country? How about and Russia is a superpower. Russia is a is a very powerful country. So if U.S. can do that, and if Europeans following suit, how are we going to do now for the countries that are not very as strong as Russia? And this is where the idea of BRICS came about. Also, the fact that people are getting together to try to really go away from the dollar system, from the European system. That's because nobody trusts the U.S. anymore. And every day there are more data, that are more decisions that are made by U.S. And European countries, that show that they are right to move away from the dollar system. And we look at the Iran war today, where people are not using the dollar anymore. They're using the yuan. They're using the Iranian currency, to buy gas, and most and many of the other countries in the Middle East over there, they are switching to using their currency to buy oil now, and the dollar system is crumbling. So this is the reason why the media has a role. But when we look at Air France, Radio France International, we hear what they say, we hear what those French television stations are talking about every day. A bunch of lies. Every day there's lies and more lies and more lies, because they want to dissuade the population. They want to control the population. But thankfully, those media have been already suspended in those countries, so the audience is pretty much zero right now. I mean, it's very few people that are still, they can use different means, but those countries, those media have been suspended in those countries, all silent countries. So therefore, the population is more understanding of the need, for the necessity for them to be able to have the same focus, the same type of information, so that they can fight against those colonial powers effectively. And the understanding is broad, throughout the continent today. And I think the challenge is, if the silent countries are able to be successful, then it's going to lead to more countries joining together, or creating their own groups of countries that are going to get together to fight against colonial powers, and we're hoping that that's going to happen. I've heard that some of the countries in the eastern side of the continent are planning to do such a thing, but everybody is really watching what is happening between those three countries first, to see how it's going to succeed. But the idea is that we need to use our own media now. We need to trust our own media in communicating with the people, so that they can be politically well educated, in terms of the fight of our forefathers. The Pan-Africanism movement did not start with us. It started with way long time ago, with people called like Mr. E. Du Bois, the W. E. Du Bois, all these great leaders, the Nkrumahs, the Nyereres, all these big leaders. And we did not, at the time, there was not really, no media around to be able to share those views. But today we have an array of media and digital channels that people can listen and get educated politically on what's happening in the continent and where we're going. And thanks to technology, also today, in artificial intelligence, communication with television, with telephones, and all these media, devices that people have, they are aware of what is happening instantly anywhere in the world, no matter the position that they are in on the world. So it's very interesting to see what is happening. But the continent is going to come through this, and I believe that it's just this is the beginning of something that that's called the Renaissance of Africa, right? We call it the Renaissance of the continent. It's a beginning. Few countries are ahead right now, but as they fight, effectively, those entities that are trying to prevent them from achieving their goals, and they win, then more and more countries, more and more leaders, and more people are going to start putting in power people who are, connected to the African roots, absolutely in power, because those are the people that we need. We don't need people who are all turn, who are, let's say, puppets of the West. We don't need those people anymore. So that's going to change the continent in the future, and that we're going to have the best leaders that we can have to help us come out of this situation.
Indeed, a very imperative information. We often say that before the physical confrontation, the war starts with a pen and with words, and it is imperative that during this very crucial and fragile moment, that information is contained so as not to be derailed from the risk takes on the ground regarding the situation in the Sahel. Just to note, ladies and gentlemen, that the forces are actually present in Mali to continue to work together with the Malian army and also the African Corps together to ensure that there is total calm and serenity in the country, actually in its new dynamics of ensuring sovereignty and ensuring collaboration with new partners that will propel especially the economic situation of the country. Some pundits say the rebels are able to sustain because of the poor leadership, and questions were like if Assimi Goita has been doing actually what the assignment to ensure that the country is on track. But then we continue to analyze this with you, Caleb. Maybe recommendations as we continue to look at this geopolitics of resistance with our case study of Mali. And as a journalist, what do you think should be the agenda set now to be able to, mitigate information and negative propaganda warfare that usually, will paint a different picture of the realities on the ground?
Well, we've seen a lot of deceptive propaganda from Western outlets. Like I said, Human Rights Watch recently took aim at the great African leader of Burkina Faso, Ibrahim Traore, and their report tried to equate the government that's emerging, that is raising people up from poverty and is fighting the terrorists, with the terrorists. I mean, it was just utterly despicable what Human Rights Watch did, but Human Rights Watch is one of these entities that is utilized for the purpose of trying to discredit those around the world who would challenge Western hegemony. And we saw that, and that we live in an age where a lot of things are done online. We have, right now, we have the social media apparatus that's been created. People talk about the danger of deep fakes and social media deceptions. One thing that I think it's important to be aware of is the efforts to manipulate dissidents against each other. And we see this happening quite frequently. There's an effort to polarize and fracture those who are sympathetic to the rising new economy and play them against each other. And that we see, mainstream media outlets in the West and prominent entities in the West highlight some dissident voices, suppress others, and play a game where they manipulate all of us that are supporting the rising new economy against each other by playing favorites, by boosting, by manipulating. That's the game that they would like to play, and it's important to be aware of this. They've already lost. Let's be clear. Western media outlets are discredited. People don't believe them anymore. People know that there were no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. People know that the USA is not attacking Iran because they think it's on the verge of getting a nuclear bomb to attack the world. People know that Western media is lying. So now they're playing a game of trying to manage the counterinsurgency or manage the dissident spaces and manipulate them. And it's important to be aware of this. I compared it to the years of lead in Italy. When Italy was on the brink of leaving NATO during the 1950s and 60s, the Western intelligence services fomented the years of lead. And because the population was overwhelmingly anti-NATO, they, fomented all kinds of confusing political violence in Italy as a way of keeping the population confused, getting people weary. People didn't know who was on what side. There was a message sent out that if you got politically active, you might get shot. All kinds of people were murdered and assassinated. There were all kinds of bombings. People were shot in their legs. And even though the Italian public wanted to leave NATO, the popular will was overridden by this kind of layer of confusion where the NATO status quo was able to win by default because with Operation Gladio, the Western intelligence services were manipulating the dissident factions that were anti-NATO against each other. And we need to be aware of the games that they are playing. And there's a lot of these kind of games that are being played. And this is Brzezinski. That was his whole strategy for moving against Russia in the Cold War. He openly talked about it in his book, The Grand Chessboard. He even talked about, quote, keep the barbarians killing each other. That was a strategy that he utilized in order to maintain Western dominance. So we have to be aware of the games that are being played and take the position that we support the rising new economy around the world. It is in the overwhelming interest of the majority of humanity. But within the people who recognize it, look, there's going to be different perspectives. There's going to be different religions represented. One thing that's been very important in the Union of Sahel States is a campaign working against religious division, bringing Christians and Muslims together, because one way that the imperialists have been able to dominate the African continent is fomenting religious division, right? And playing Muslims against Christians, getting Christians to believe they're under great danger and threat from Muslims, getting Muslims to believe that Christians are their mortal enemy. And when it gets down to it, everybody loses when these kinds of games are played. So I think that's the most important thing to keep in mind during this educational work. We've already won the main battle. People see that the Western outlets, the Western media is lying and deceptive. So now we have to move ahead with the confidence of the global majority rejecting the colonizers and their media outlets to bring people to truth and bring forward a unified front that can bring on the new world of growth and development against the Malthusian Western order.
Indeed, very imperative. Thank you so much, Caleb. And we run off with you, Dr. Ashil Eke. It is a very crucial moment for the African continent, and the whole agenda of the Sahelian states has actually brought some sort of impetuous vitality and huge expectations as to, with people saying that this is actually the platform that will bring that new Africa that we want, the one that is more practical and living the realities of the new world order. So with the precarious situation in Mali and the conspicuous targeting of strategic politicians, like what we saw, the demise, the killing of Mali's defense minister, internal disagreements, and the vulnerability of the political sphere, what recommendations can be given to probably diplomatically, in line with the intelligence, information, and even some sort of political, agreements or discussions that will actually solve the problem of insecurity?
Well, what we saw in Mali is not simple. It's not a simple local mutiny, right? So it's a terrorist coup attempt by the organizations that we call JNIM and the FLA, that are backed and exploited by foreign interests that cannot accept, that African countries could be sovereign. So they killed General Sadio Camara. They attacked the institutions in Mali. They targeted the economic lifelines of the country. All this to force, the regime to change by terror, instead of through other means, through the regular means, ballot box, for example. But so as Africans, we must refuse. We really must refuse both the jihadist project. I don't think the jihadist word is really appropriate, because jihad is for people who are trying to convert non-Muslims to to be Muslim. But here in this case, they are Muslim fighting Muslims, so those are terrorists that are being used and that are being framed as jihadists by the Western media. Don't understand what jihadist means. But there's a lot of manipulation also from Western countries, not particularly France, and Ukraine, who is also part of this. So the answer is not to go back to dependency, but to strengthen cooperation between African countries, and to fix our governance issues or governance failures. And in the case of the Mali, the Malians have to decide Mali's future, not foreign entities, that are backing a terrorist organization. So if African governments can be overthrown by terrorist organizations acting as foreign proxies, then the independence of those African countries is going to be an illusion, right? So what we need to do is exactly what the Malians, the Sahelian countries are doing, is fight strongly to win their independence, and the whole continent is watching as those foreign leaders, colonial powers, because they want that experience of the Sahelian countries to fail, so they can come back, running and happy to be able to colonize us again a second time. So,
Okay.
yeah, thank you.
Absolutely, yeah. Countries cannot function in isolation. There is need for cooperation. There is need for collaboration, but that should be done on clear terms, as we see that the world is a global village, and we need to give importance to multipolarity. We can't be using multipolarity, multilateralism, and then thinking about countries working independently, but then there is need to respect sovereignty, political sovereignty, economic sovereignty, and even social sovereignty, to ensure that we actually bring together the differences, and of course make the world a better place for humanity. To note, of course, that it remains a very disturbing situation in Mali, because there is need for diplomatic meetings, political meetings, to ensure how to curtail such a conspiracy that happens. It targeted the defense minister. Who is next? Is there too much polarization in Mali's political sphere? Is there something that Assimi Goïta is not doing right that has actually attracted this? Can we now answer if the problem is coming totally from the internal scope, or is it from the external forces? This and more will continue to answer subsequently as we continue to educate masses on this platform of Global Insights, understanding the stakes, and of course setting a clear and positive agenda that will actually push forth the African continent to the position where it belongs, especially in line with international cooperation. I want to take this opportunity to thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for the great insight, and of course immense thank you to the technical team for ensuring that the program was a success. Just to note, it was proposed to you by Globus. Hoping to see you next time and soonest, but then do have a lovely weekend. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you, Caleb.
All the best.
All the
Thank you.
best.
Thank
Have a
you.
good week.